Hi, everyone. Welcome. And thank you for joining today's webinar on the Kauffman Foundation's Research Grant Pathway. We're thrilled to have you here as we walk through the key components of this grant, designed specifically to fund forward-facing research projects that both catalyze the field and develop greater understanding of how to close racial wealth gaps. The research will be a key contributor to closing economic mobility gaps in the Kansas City region. If you previously joined us at our overview webinars, thank you for doing so. We want to acknowledge that some of the content we cover today will be overlapping from previous, but really our focus today is to go deeper on our research grants. So I'm here, Allison Bajracharya, Chief Impact and Strategy Officer, and excited to be here alongside my colleagues, Dr. Yvonne Owens Ferguson, our Chief Research Learning and Evaluation Officer, and Dr. Chhaya Kolavalli, our Senior Evaluation Officer, who has been taking the lead on the design of these research grants. Today, we're going to spend a little bit of time just grounding you in our grant-making relaunch, where we've been and where we're going. We'll provide a high-level overview of all of our grants, and then we'll go deeper specifically on the research grants, including a deep dive, which Dr. Yvonne Ferguson will lead us through, and then Chhaya will talk us through some of the more specifics in terms of what to expect in their letter of interest and application, and then we'll open it up for questions. So to begin, over the last year and a few months, we've been going through a strategic refresh. And we started by establishing our vision. We want to ensure that our approach not only honors the legacy of our founder, Ewing Marion Kauffman, but also reflects the needs and aspirations of our community today. Our strategic refresh is the culmination of extensive research and community engagement. Over the last year, we've been gathering insights, reflecting on our previous work, and considering how we can be more effective in driving economic mobility. And now I'm happy to say our vision for 2035 is clear. We want to see a Kansas City where everyone has the opportunity to thrive, regardless of background. After establishing our vision, we determined our priorities, and we didn't do so in isolation. We conducted a series of community conversations to gather feedback and learn from the people who know Kansas City best, including many of you. We aligned what we heard from our community with national and local research on strategies that are most effective at closing the wealth gap. So thank you to all of you who contributed to that research. And we landed on the following 3 strategic priorities. First, college access and completion, ensuring more students not only enroll in college, but also complete their college degrees. Second, workforce and career development, connecting people with the skills and opportunities needed to succeed in today's job market. And third, entrepreneurship, supporting new and existing businesses that can drive economic growth and job creation. Our why behind this is that we determined that if we concentrate on these 3 priority areas and collaborate with key organizations that drive impact in those areas, we can meaningfully narrow and move to close the economic gaps that persist in our community, particularly for those living far below the median income in the Kansas City region. The why behind our priorities is simple yet powerful. We are committed to closing gaps for the most underserved communities. Our how? The feedback we received was invaluable and has shaped every aspect of the strategic refresh. We heard loud and clear that people want more than just resources. They want a foundation that is engaged, responsive, and deeply connected to the community. After establishing our vision and then our priority areas, we spent the last few months really identifying what are our focus areas. These focus areas are intended to bring coherence across all of our strategic priorities and all of our grant pathways. They include, first, essential competencies and skills, equipping individuals with the mindsets, behaviors, and skills needed to succeed in both school and career. Second, education and employer connection, strengthening the ties between education providers and employers to ensure that our workforce is prepared and relevant. Third, participation and belonging, cultivating an environment where everyone feels seen, valued, and able to contribute, regardless of their background. And fourth, equitable access, making learning pathways affordable and capital accessible to all learners, workers, and entrepreneurs. Under this new strategy, we're offering several types of grants to meet a range of needs. I'm going to go over all of these at a very high level, and then we'll go deep into research. I recognize all the information I'm sharing is a lot, and so I just want to remind everyone that we have more detail regarding our focus areas and each of our grant types on our website. We also have detailed FAQs, and we have recorded all of our previous webinars. So if you're interested in learning more on any of these, there are a number of resources you can explore. First, our capacity building grants. These are designed to help organizations strengthen their internal operations so they can have a greater impact. Applications are now closed for our first round, which closed last week, but they will open again in the spring. Second is our collective impact grants. These are for coalitions of high-capacity organizations that are working together to drive systems-level change. We're particularly interested in projects related to education and employer connection, as well as equitable access. Applications for this two-part grant are the first application is due on November 1st. We will then identify planning grant awardees, and those planning grant awardees will spend the next 9 months working on a plan for implementation, which they'll submit next fall. Project grants. These provide funding for specific projects that align with our strategic priorities, whether it's a new initiative or the scaling of an existing one. Letters of interest for project grants opened yesterday. Research grants, what we're about to talk much more about, support research that deepens our understanding of the issues we're addressing and translates findings into practical solutions. Letters of interest for research grants also opened yesterday. Additionally, for organizations who've historically received funding from the Kauffman Foundation and are no longer aligned with our strategic priorities and focus areas, we're offering one-time funding through our Sunset grants to transition organizations from previous support to new sources of revenue. Lastly, in 2025, we're launching the Kauffman Uncommon Leadership Award. This award will honor leaders who are making a significant impact in the Kansas City region through innovative, generous, and meaningful work. So that was a high-level overview. Again, it was a lot of information. If you have questions regarding any of these other grants other than research, I encourage you to go on our website to learn more or to review our previous webinars. And with that, I'm very excited to hand it over to Dr. Yvonne Ferguson.
Thank you so much, Allison. I'm excited to discuss our research grant pathway with you today. We have spent the last several months building and iterating on this grant pathway in the hopes that it will elicit rigorous research and help inform our foundation's 2035 vision to become a national model for equitable economic mobility. Specifically, we're soliciting forward-facing research projects that both catalyze the field and develop a deeper understanding of how to close racial wealth gaps. We believe that by deepening our understanding of how racial wealth gaps are built, sustained, and dismantled, these grants will strengthen the foundation's ability to catalyze our investments across the 3 strategic priorities that Allison discussed and accelerate equitable economic opportunity in the Kansas City region. Now, we know that racial wealth gap is the largest economic disparity between Black and white Americans, and it is also among the most persistent economic disparity, not only in Kansas City, but across the nation. Understanding that the racial wealth gap is a measure or indicator of economic inequity, we see manifestations of racial wealth gaps in many areas. We see it in wages, hiring, access to college, and lending practices, just to name a few. Thus, we see our 3 strategic priorities of increasing college access and completion, improving workforce and career development, and supporting and sustaining entrepreneurship as pathways towards setting generations of historically under-resourced communities on the path to prosperity. How are we as a foundation approaching research? Well, this slide presents our guiding principles. At the core, we are oriented to the work by starting where the people are with cultural humility. We are guided by practicing scientific rigor and that we want to stay true to the scientific method and ensure robust study designs, methodologies, analyses, interpretation, and reporting of results while centering community. We apply equity principles to data by viewing data as a shared asset that, along with the collection, analysis, translation, interpretation, and the sharing of data, are reflective of the people involved in the research process. And we are intentional in our thinking about the impact and result of our actions from the start. So with learning for action and research, we are guided by thinking about how a research proposal would contribute to understanding the racial wealth gap and informing efforts and action to close it. Building trust is also a guiding principle because we all know that when we work with the research committee or any community, we always need to go at the speed of trust. And our final guiding principle is keeping things simple. We aim to communicate complex scientific ideas with simplicity to the public. So now that I've provided an overview of why our research opportunity broadly focuses on closing the racial wealth gap and our guiding principles toward research, I'll now pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Chhaya, who will share more details about the research grant application process. Chhaya?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Ferguson. So research grants are $250,000 per year minimum opportunities. Proposed projects can last 1 or more years, whatever scope you feel is appropriate for the research question being explored. And the significant funding size here is really intentional. We're looking for research projects that can operate at scale and create impact. Even though this timeline is available online, I do want to take a second to walk you through it. You may have seen on the website that we listed LOI as rolling. Please note, we have changed this to more accurately reflect our process. We have 2 funding cycles per year, and LOI will only be accepted during those windows. So I'll talk you through the upcoming timeline for Q2 2025 funding disbursement. We will be accepting LOI until January 10th, 2025. We'll begin reviewing LOI on November 15th of this year. We highly encourage applicants to submit earlier rather than later, as LOI will be reviewed in the order they are received. We aim to notify all full proposal invitees by January 31st, 2025, and full proposals will be due in February 21st of 2025. We anticipate making notifications of awards and dispersing funding in Q2 2025. The application process starts on our website. You will find information for every grant category and an eligibility quiz made up of a few yes or no questions. This is designed to make sure you understand the minimum requirements to apply for this grant and to help ensure that your proposed work is aligned to our focus areas. Please know that the criteria is not that you have to be Kansas City based, but your project does have to have the potential to impact or inform efforts to close economic mobility gaps in the Kansas City region. The application questions are available on our website as a PDF to download. That'll show you both the questions that make up our LOI and our full application. I highly recommend you review those questions, as that will help you determine whether or not this grant makes sense for you. Applications will be reviewed both by Kauffman staff and by external peer review. So external reviewers will be selected based on methodological and topical expertise, and they'll help us ensure that we're only moving forward high quality work. So what kinds of research projects are we interested in supporting through this grant opportunity? As you've heard us share, our guiding principle for this grant pathway is to fund high-quality research projects that both advance the field and develop greater understanding of how to close racial wealth gaps. And you will find some example research questions on our website, also shared here, but I invite you to check the website out. I do want to emphasize that these are not meant as prescriptive. These are not meant to suggest that these example questions will receive priority review. They are purely examples of the scope and scale and level of impact that we think competitive grant proposals would achieve. So we're looking for forward-facing, innovative, rigorous work that has the potential to incite transformative change. And we recognize that it takes all kinds of perspectives, disciplines, methodologies, and theories to fully understand how racial wealth gaps are built and sustained and how they could be dismantled. So again, I want to emphasize that we are open to all methodologies and approaches to studying these and other questions, as long as they advance innovative, rigorous investigation into racial wealth gaps. I want to share a little bit about the criteria we'll be using to assess these research proposals. We want to be as transparent as possible about what a successful proposal would look like. To that end, you'll find all of this information on our website. We've also designed each LOI and full application question to very explicitly match with our rubric assessments. So there are no trick questions here. We will, of course, assess proposals against some basic criteria. So we'll be looking for adherence to application guidelines and instructions, clarity in writing and thought throughout the proposal. We'll also be looking at whether the project lead or team holds strong direct or transferable experience in both the research area and in executing on a grant of this size. And we'll also assess whether the proposed timelines, budgets, and staffing plans are appropriate for the proposed work. But we'll also be looking at some more in-depth criteria. We'll be looking for work that clearly speaks to our goal of closing wealth gaps and work that aligns with our strategic priorities and focus areas. We want a strong articulation of how the research could inform efforts to close wealth gaps in Kansas City. This is really important to us, as you heard Dr. Ferguson share earlier. So whether the work is conducted in Kansas City or not, we're looking for clear, thoughtful, and actionable analysis of how the research is applicable to Kansas City. We'll also be looking for rigorous and in-depth dissemination and evaluation plans, which are appropriate for the work being proposed. Lastly, there are 2 criteria that assess equitable research processes. So all applicants invited to submit full applications will be expected to share their thinking on how equitable approaches and processes are embedded in their proposed work. And we expect that to look very different depending on the method and approach you're using. We understand that could vary, For some, this could involve intentional and innovative disaggregation plans. For others, this could involve creating feedback loops with folks with lived experience to validate research findings. We do not want to be prescriptive here. Equitable processes will look different for different research projects, and we want to give you the space to design what's right for your work. And we have one criteria that only applies if you're submitting a research project that involves community engaged or participatory approaches. If you are working closely with community in your project, you'll be asked to answer a full proposal question about your experience working with community in the past, and you'll also need to upload letters of support from any named partners. Our reviewers will assess this against the criteria that proposals should involve mutually beneficial and inclusive engagement plans. But again, I invite you to check out our website where all of the application questions and the review criteria are laid out in detail for you. Okay, I'm going to pass it back to Allison.
Thanks so much, Chhaya. All right, so we are about to open it up to questions, and we're sure there are many of them. If we don't get to all of your questions today, please know we are having upcoming office hours. Those office hours are intended to provide responses to high-level questions that we may not have covered or others that emerge as you're reviewing all of the content online. One caveat I will say is our approach to grant making this year is different than years past. We are really trying to disseminate our information about grant opportunities, the criteria we're considering, the way to approach the application to as many as people as possible and as consistently as possible. So that's why we have webinars and office hours and recordings, etc. That being said, we are not working individually with grantees to provide super specific advice. So unfortunately, if you're looking for advice on the way to ask a question or something especially hyper-focused on your point of view, that is probably not an answer we're going to get to. So I just say that because I don't want anybody to be disappointed. That being said, if you have questions around the content we've shared and it's not clear, or you missed something, or you're just confused, please feel free to ask that, and we will do our best to respond as much as possible. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Dr. Yvonne, who's going to help us field the questions that are coming through.
Yeah, thank you so much, Allison. So we are queuing up your questions right now. So I will ask that you be patient as I comb through some of the questions that have come through. One of the first questions that we have gotten is about the tie to Kansas City, and we get that question a lot. So I am going to pass that question over to Chhaya, and the question is around, do you have to be based in Kansas City, or does your project have to be based in Kansas City?
No to both of those questions. You do not have to be based in Kansas City, and your project does not have to be based in Kansas City. I would just refer you back to our 2035 vision. We're working to help Kansas City become a model for equitable economic mobility. We understand that the research that would help us get there could be conducted nationally in all sorts of different contexts. What we do want is that research really speaks to our local context. And so successful applicants will really be emphasizing that in their proposals. Wherever research is located, you would be talking about the context in which research is located and how that relates to us here, and what are the tangible ways it could help us move forward towards that 2035 vision. So again, to reiterate, you don't need to be located in Kansas City.
Awesome. There's another question around what is the max amount for research grants? So we present a minimum amount of $250K per year. We don't put a max amount on the budget, but we do ask for a budget. So we want to look and make sure that you're proposing what you're proposing in terms of your research aligns with your budget. We do want to make sure all those things that Chhaya talked about in terms of making sure it's rigorous, making sure it makes sense, making sure you advance innovative, rigorous investigation into racial wealth gaps and those criteria that she also mentioned. So again, we don't put a max amount on the budget. However, you have to make it make sense. Chhaya, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you got most of it. The only thing I'll add is that when we're looking at budgets, I think we'll be thinking about potential for impact, and have you allocated that budget in a way that we can really see you're orienting the work towards a large scale impact in both your field and in conversations around this work in Kansas City.
Awesome. Okay, so the next question is around community engaged research. And one of the things that the questions ask about, can we hear more about the community engaged piece and community focused research? And the other question around that is around community partners as part of the research build. And can you ask for money for implementation and pilots, et cetera? So I will answer the second part about can you ask for money for implementation pilots, et cetera? Yes. In terms of what Chhaya mentioned in her remarks, we are not specific to any type of approach or methodologies. Again, we ask that your proposal makes sense around your ideas in terms of the investigation of racial wealth gaps. In terms of community partners, if you are doing community engaged research, yes, we do encourage them, of course, to be part of that research build. And then I'm going to pass it over to Chhaya so she can talk more specifically around the community engaged piece and those requirements that we have for community engaged research.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, we're open to all methodologies, and we know some questions in some contexts are best explored in a community engaged way. And so for those projects, we do have an optional question on our full proposal, and we have an optional question that we as reviewers will assess your work against. What we're looking for in community engaged projects is an understanding of the reciprocity and trust and mutually beneficial pieces of work that we hope to see in community engaged research projects. So we'll be looking for a relationship with a community partner that's really thoughtfully developed, that might be longer than this project scope. We'll be looking at budget to see, are we allocating funding to support this relationship? And we'll also be following up potentially with any named partners to discuss the relationship with them during the review process. So we really care about the authenticity of that relationship, and we'll be looking for that in a number of ways as we assess proposals.
Awesome. Thank you, Chhaya, for that. There's another question along those lines around what are we looking for in the LOI and how would that be different than the full proposal? I'll encourage everyone right now to, again, as Allison mentioned, you can visit our website, and on our funding page, you can actually get the PDF of what we ask for in the LOI and information about what the full proposal also asks for. And if the people behind the screen can put that link in the chat, that would be helpful. But again, what are we looking for in the LOI? I'll pass it over to Chhaya to add more context to that.
Yeah, so first high level, I'll note that you'll see in this PDF on our website that includes the LOI and full proposal questions that there's quite a bit of overlap. So what you submit at the LOI stage, a lot of that will port over into the full application stage, where you'll be asked to expand on some questions and answer some new ones as well. That's to make it easy for you. We're looking for brevity and responses here, clarity and thought in the least amount of words possible. You'll find general questions around your approach, around methods, around a specific question around impact in Kansas City and how you will articulate the impact of your work in Kansas City. And at the full proposal stage, you'll find these equity questions that I mentioned around how are you thinking about embedding equitable processes in your work? And if you're working with community, how are you thinking about that relationship and sustaining it? But you can find the details of all of those questions, the exact wording of them on our website.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So this question, I'll start to answer some of it and I'll pass it to Allison as well. Does applying for a grant affect your ability to apply for other grants on our grant pathways? So for the research grant, again, this is specific for research. You can apply for a grant depending on your depending on what type of organization you are, but mostly those that are interested in research in terms of universities, research firms that I saw listed in our registration, and also different entities in terms of research organizations and firms are eligible to apply for the research grant. And it depends on the grant pathway in terms of you applying for others. And I'll pass that to Allison to respond.
Thanks, Yvonne. In general, our starting perspective on this is we encourage applicants to only apply for one grant. That being said, there are a couple of exceptions that Yvonne was referring to. So if you are a large institution, which I'm sure there are several on this call, and you have multiple departments or divisions that are aligned with our priorities and our focus areas, it is okay to apply for more than one grant. Our biggest, the lens we're bringing to this work is making sure the organizations we're supporting are really well positioned to implement the work well, especially given the ambition we have behind our 10-year vision. So for the most part, organizations should only intend to apply for one grant, with the exception if you're a large organization with multiple departments. The one additional exception to that is if you are asked to apply as a coalition member. So not as a lead, but as a coalition member for the collective impact grant. If you're a coalition member, but not the lead, you can also apply for another grant.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. Another question that has come up is around how many years of funding do you typically fund? So I'll start out by saying this, again, we're doing grant making differently as we've done in the past. So there's no typical in terms of how we've done this. And so all that to say, we are learning and iterating through this process and really want your feedback on it. In terms of how many years, for the research grants, it could be 1 year, it could be multiple years. And then there's another question along those lines in terms of the amount and the minimum. And will that amount and minimum for this cycle and cycle 1 be the same for cycle 2? So our minimum amount is $250K, and that will also be the minimum amount for the next cycle and rounds of cycle for the LOIs and the full application if you're invited to such.
Dr. Yvonne, if you don't mind, I'm just going to add that this is, as we are relaunching this work, we're also eager to learn and grow from it. So it is possible in future years we'll iterate. So in future years, it may not look exactly the same, but our goals are the same. So there may be some adjustments in numbers over time, but for this year, numbers are the same.
All right, thank you for that. I do want to, Chhaya, there's questions around the timeline for the process in terms of the LOIs and due dates. So could you go over that information again for us? Thanks.
Yes. So speaking just around this cycle, we will only be accepting LOI during 2 defined periods during the year. For this first cycle, LOI are due by January 10th. We're going to start reviewing LOI starting November 15th, and we just encourage you to submit earlier rather than later because we'll be reviewing these as they come in. And we'll aim to notify you if you're invited to the full application stage by January 31st. And I believe the full applications are due end of February. And funding disbursements will be made later that spring. And the second cycle would open shortly thereafter in the summer. And we would have those details on our website early this spring, I think.
Thank you for that. And along those same lines, there's a question around us mentioning that it's better to apply earlier than later. Well, we say that because applications or LOI will be reviewed in the order that it is received. However, there is still a standard response date that everyone who applies in cycle 1 will receive their response at the same time. So it isn't, the other part of the question around that was around, is there a possibility that the funding would all be allocated prior to the deadline? And that is no. We just encourage folks to apply earlier than later, but the deadlines that Chhaya stated and that are on our website still stand in terms of notification and actual funding. Is there anything you want to add to that, Chhaya?
No, other than we will also have, we encourage you to attend our office hours. If you have questions about the particularities of this timeline, we're available to talk about this. And yeah, we just encourage you to submit as early as possible so that we can get decisions out the door as early as possible.
Awesome. So there is a question around research products and deliverables. And in terms of what we're looking for, are we looking for public or policy-facing research or more nuanced research products like peer-reviewed articles? And I will toss that over to Chhaya.
Yeah, so we are looking for impact at a couple scales, as we've mentioned over and over. So we're looking for contributions to your field. We're looking for contributions to academia, and we're looking to contributions to how we discuss racial wealth gaps in Kansas City. And we know that impact in both of those areas will look really different depending on what field you're in, what methods you use, and what kind of research institution you're housed at. We know everybody's going to be bringing different skills, so we try not to be prescriptive in noting the certain kinds of deliverables we wanted from each project. There are some commonalities. Successful projects going forward will be asked to submit, short summaries and white papers of their work, short summaries and white papers of how the work impacts Kansas City. But in general, it's up to you to make the case for what impact looks like in your specific project. So that could be a peer-reviewed paper, that could be a policy outcome, that could be a community-engaged deliverable that looks very different on the ground. So it could be whatever you articulate it to, and we're just looking for thoughtful responses in terms of why that is the best mechanism for impact.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Chhaya. There's also to add on with to what Chhaya mentioned, as researchers, there will be, we talked about our learning and how we want to learn during this process. And so as part of the expectations around receiving an award, it will be opportunities for researchers to come to Kansas City to communicate their findings to the community, to the public, to those stakeholders that are interested. We, again, as a foundation, are really want to share materials and share research results. So that's one thing to look forward to if you're a grantee, is coming to Kansas City, which is an awesome place. Okay. There is another question around. This is an interesting question. What are the parameters around usage of grant funds? So I know, Allison, there is a list of things that our grant funds cannot fund. So if you can remember that, and it's also on our website, but if you can remember that, can you answer that question?
Thanks for that easy pass over here. I won't be able to recite all of the specifics, but in general,
Okay, I knew
we are
you couldn't
not,
recite
we
all
are
of
not
them, but
able.
you're good, you're good.
We're not able to support religious activities, political activities, or any activities that would be considered discriminatory in nature. There is a full list on our website, and the first step you'll take once you're applying is there's an eligibility quiz, and it'll actually bullet out all those specifics. But I think those are some good parameters to start with.
Awesome, thank you
And
for that.
one note is that you can also find specific parameters for overhead versus for based on the type of institution that's applying. So there is a specific overhead amount for university applicants, and you can find that on the website.
And they have put some eligibility in the chat. So thank you for that. There's a question around if you don't get invited to complete the full application after submitting your LOI, will there be an opportunity to discuss with someone on the reason? So I'll start and then I'll pass it to you, Chhaya. So if you don't get invited to complete a full application, again, we're not, because of capacity, we don't know how many awesome applications we're going to receive. We know there's enthusiasm around this topic, but we're not sure. So we can't make a promise that we can have sessions with everyone in terms of the reason why they weren't asked to complete a full application. But I'll also pass it over to Chhaya to add more context to my response on that.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I think we want to be good partners and share as much information as possible. Like Dr. Ferguson said, we can't make promises because we anticipate a high volume of applications. At full proposal stage, if there are promising applications and our capacity allows, we will make every effort we can to communicate with applicants, but that's not something we can guarantee at this time.
Awesome. I'm going to also encourage, if they haven't already encouraged in the chat, to please add your questions to the Q&A box so we can answer them. There is a question, there's another question about community partners, and we can add to that. So in terms of community partners, and I know Chhaya talked about it before, if you do have community partners, including those letters of support of your community partners to understand the relationship between you as, if you're a research institution or a university, and the past research that you've done, for example, that would be something to support your application. And we do allow for that in the grant portal for you to upload those letters of support. It's also important in terms of equity to include those partners in your budget and how you put together your budget for your community partners is also important and is paid attention to. I'll also add to that, this hasn't necessarily been a question, but because we are not experts in all things that you might be proposing, there is an external review that will go on with proposals that invited proposals. So we will be contacting and facilitating an external review process for all the research applications received. Okay. Oh, Chhaya, do you want to add a little bit more about the external review process?
Yeah.
Since I know you're busy developing it.
Some of you who are on the call may be getting that email from us. We're trying to reach out to as many experts as possible with as many areas of expertise as possible so that we're ready when we get full proposal applications to bring in folks who are closest to the work and can speak to its strengths and opportunities. So folks will be invited based on whether they are deciding to apply this round or not to serve as external reviewers. That process will be confidential. We'll ask external reviewers to confirm they don't have conflicts of interest and to keep the information in those proposals confidential. But that will really help us to get that breadth of understanding, since we're soliciting a broad range of methodologies and approaches to this work.
Awesome. So here's a question around if you have more than one viable idea or concept or research question, will we only be funding one? And again, with that question, is it better to submit only one or several to increase the likelihood of selection? So we're going to go back to making sure that what you submit is rigorous and strong in terms of your proposal. If you have more than one strong research question that you want to investigate, that is that you think are viably strong and require a full, LOI and application to submit, those will be reviewed. But I encourage that they be very separate and disparate type of questions that you are submitting, because they would have very different types of purposes, different folks involved, different budget amounts, and the like. So again, if you do submit more than one concept, please make sure it is very different in terms of the research question than your other proposal. Chhaya, do you want to add to that?
The only thing I'll say is that rather than thinking about likelihood of funding, I think what we're looking for in projects is you staying true to your skills and strengths as a researcher and submitting the most impactful work you can that you think is going to have the biggest impact on the field. And so what is the most exciting and impactful question you're considering and that you can contribute to at this moment? I think following that pathway rather than thinking about what is the most effective way to get funded will be much more likely to end in a successful proposal.
Thank you. There's another question around progress report requirements and how often must they be submitted, and are there specific timelines for completing the research? And I will start by saying, again, it depends on what you propose in terms of the timeline. If you have, for example, a secondary data analysis that you are looking at, and it's a 1-year project, and this is just an example, then your timeline, of course, will be different, and your progress report will be different than someone else who submitted a proposal that's, more than 1 year in a sense. For progress reports, there will be, depending on your milestones that you come up with in terms of your submission and timeline, and our research learning evaluation officers and impact officers will be working with you in terms of setting what those milestones and timeline will look like, and we can work from there. So again, it will depend on the length of the project that you're submitting or funded to do, and there will be progress reports that are required, and that will be there'll be more details once you become a grantee. Another question, Allison, this is for you. Does the research applicant need to be a 501c3?
Great question. So the most important piece is that your work is intended for charitable purposes. So if you're not a 501c3, but you can demonstrate that your work is intended for charitable purposes, we can consider it. The review process may take longer. Historically, we have, and we know we will continue to do ER and PRI grants. So please reach out to our grant-making email, and we can connect with you on the specifics to understand the context and just ensure that there's alignment there.
Thank you, Allison. There's another question that are around knowing how many LOIs that we are going to get. Are we only going to fund a certain amount? And the answer to that is we don't know how many to expect in terms of LOI, nor do we have a certain amount that we plan to fund. Again, we are looking for strong, rigorous proposed research that focus on how, and in fact, you would be adding to the field in terms of closing racial wealth gaps, and also making sure that you respond to the question about how it actually does or inform closing those racial wealth gaps in the Kansas City region. There's another question around if there's a required financial statement for research-based groups or entities. Would that be needed? And I'm going to toss that to Allison. If you could answer that.
Yeah, so we do ask organizations to submit your most recent audit. If you don't have that for whatever reason, then a financial statement will do as an alternative.
Thank you. So if you do have additional questions, I'm going to talk to the people behind the screen and see if there's additional questions for us to answer and respond to. We do encourage you, we have a couple of minutes for the webinar, so please put your questions in the Q&A chat, and also know that you can visit our website for more specifics and more details about the research opportunity. So there's another question around if their research project impacts the racial wealth gap nationally instead of local to Kansas City, is that appropriate? And the answer to that is yes, it's appropriate. And I'm going to pass it to Chhaya to talk more specifically about that question. Chhaya?
Yeah, absolutely appropriate. What we're looking for is intentionality for how you translate and share those results for us. How you think about how stakeholders in Kansas City could use that information, specific stakeholders, how we could use that information, how that national context compares to Kansas City demographics or Kansas City as a cultural region. And so making those comparisons and talking about why what you're learning at this broad scale may or may not be relevant locally and the ways in which that is. That's what we're looking for, because we understand that this research needs to be conducted across the nation in many different ways, but we just want more conversation across regionality. So yes, conduct your work nationally, but we will ask you to be intentional with sharing how it impacts us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chhaya. And there's another question around having a fiscal sponsor. And I know there are some organizations that will need a fiscal sponsor in terms of applying for our grant opportunities. And I'll pass that over to Allison so she can talk about for those that need a fiscal sponsor, what that looks like in terms of applying for our grant opportunities.
You can apply and acknowledge your fiscal sponsor and just explain whose financials you'll be submitting and why. And if you have a sense of timeline for when you're pursuing your own independence, please indicate that. And if you're planning on continuing your relationship with your fiscal sponsor through the duration of the grant, that's understandable as well. And just please articulate that.
Awesome. Thank you. So we do want to thank everyone for coming to this webinar. There will be a recording that you can access, and the links will be on our website. And also, again, please feel free to visit that recorded webinar if you want additional information, and please share with your networks about this research opportunity. And we look forward to receiving all those strong proposals that will come to us. So thank you again for joining us this afternoon. Thank you to Allison and thank you to Chhaya for your thoughtful responses to the questions and just being a part of this opportunity, and really want to wish everyone a great afternoon.